Welcome, thanks for coming. I'm Rob Atkinson, president of ITIF. We want to talk today about, in part, as we release a new ITIF report, on how we can integrate information and communications technology with the Surface Transportation Reauthorization, which I believe is going to be passed in this century, but I don't want to go on a limb. I'm pretty sure that's going to happen. Just kidding, obviously. I might, although more than I did myself, it won't pass. And I think it provides a real opportunity to do something fundamentally different. Those of you who remember back, this was the early 90s when we did ICT for the intermodalism, and that was a big change. I think we're at a similar inflection point with surface transportation today that we were back in the 90s when we integrated intermodalism. It's now time to integrate information and communications technology. The argument will be, aren't roads all about pavement, concrete, iron, and steel? Yeah, but as we talk about this report, increasingly there's intelligence being built in or can be built in. I'll leave you with one statistic before I turn it over to Stephen, and I'll introduce our panelists here in a moment. But I think there's really only one statistic you need to know about this issue. Look at the amount of money U.S. corporations invest in capital equipment every year. How much of those are going into sort of regular old machines, steel machines, things like that? How much of it is going into computing, software, those kinds of things? So if you look at that ratio, so this is going to be complicated. You're going to do a ratio of a ratio. And the top ratio is the amount of money that U.S. companies spend on IT as a share of their overall CapEx investments. Now take the bottom ratio, is the amount of money that DOT, U.S. DOT, funds on ITS versus all the rest of what they spend on transportation. That ratio is 60. So U.S. companies are putting essentially on IT intensity 60 times more than what our transportation system is doing. Now, clearly, there are differences, and I want to make it sound like it's not exactly the same. But it does suggest the magnitude, and it suggests just how far behind our transportation system is in integrating ITS into it. So we have a great panel this morning. Congressman Blake Farenthold is going to be joining us in a moment, and when he joins us, we'll have him talk first. Congressman Farenthold is in his third term in Congress, representing the 27th District of Texas. He serves on the House Oversight Committee, Judiciary, and for the purposes of this event, he's on the Transportation and Infrastructure, and he's taken a real deep interest in the whole question of ITS. Prior to being elected to Congress, he was in a law firm and also had a consulting firm of his own doing computer consulting. On my far left is Jonathan Gifford. Dr. Gifford is the director of the Center for Transportation Public-Private Partnership Policy at George Mason University. The center focuses on research and education around public-private partnerships for delivering infrastructure services. He's written extensively on a whole set of ITS issues, including standards and the easy pass electronic payment system. And Jonathan is a real scholar and thought leader in this whole issue and has been into that for over 20 years, so thank you for joining us. Mary Brown is the Director of Government Affairs at Cisco Systems, where she covers a wide range of IT and IT-based technology issues in wireless and networking. And in addition to telecom issues, she has experience, substantial experience in internet law and policy, and increasingly transportation. Cisco is going to be more and more a transportation company. And I think that's what's so fun and exciting about this space, is that transportation companies you used to think about, that's really, really changing in the country. Finish introducing folks. Lastly, Hillary Kane is the Director of Technology and Innovation Policy for Toyota's Government Affairs team here in Washington. She handles a set of policy issues related to connected vehicles and in-vehicle telematics. And increasingly, cars are going to become like computers. We're going to buy a new one, not because it wore out, but because the operating system is better, or it has a new feature. And the whole question is how cars are becoming intelligent and then interacting with the infrastructure. It's going to be a critical question as we go forward. Prior to coming to Toyota, Hillary spent 4 years on the staff of the Science-Based Technology Committee here in the House, and was also staff member of the Subcommittee on Technology and Innovation. So with that, we'll hear some remarks from Congressman Farenthold, and we're delighted that you could join us, and then if we have time for a couple of questions, we can do
that. All right, that's fine. I'm on Congressional Standard Time, which is, I'm actually ahead of Congressional Standard Time, I'm 15 minutes late. So if y'all came to Washington to look for the federal government to implement this really cool technology that's going to make our highways safer and relieve congestion and do all sorts of cool things that I know you talked about, you guys are in the wrong place. The federal government can't compute around a paper bag. It's one of the reasons I'm not as worried about privacy considerations as a lot of other folks are. I mean, as recently as last year, there were ads for federal jobs for COBOL programmers. So that gives you an idea of where the federal government is technology-wise. It's kind of scary. And I've thought about it for a little while. I can't name too many federal government IT success stories. The only one I can come up with is the internet. And that was kind of just shepherded along by the federal government and actually done by a bunch of universities for our government. But maybe that's the model that we need to be looking at for technology in the transportation system. Rather than a heavy-handed approach from the government facilitates a way to build an infrastructure that true innovators can take advantage of. And what does that look like and how does it get done? There are basically two ways to get things done, financing-wise in the government. It's the carrot and the stick. The carrot says, do this, we'll give you more money. The stick says, if you don't do this, we're going to take away money. In this funding environment, sticks are actually a whole lot easier to run through Congress. Not many conservatives at least want to go home and say, I just voted $1 billion more so you can have a self-driving car. But it's real easy to say to the constituents back home, you know, state departments of transportation need to get on the ball and adopt some innovation, and if they don't, we're going to hold back 2% or 3% of the funding. So the stick's an easier sell politically. It may not be what some of y'all want to hear, but it is. So we've got a new highway bill that we're going to, long-term, we're going to try to get done this year. I can tell you it will not be done by the end of the expiration of MAP 21. The current plan is a 2-month MAP 21 extension because there's enough money in the highway trust fund to last for 2 months. What's the holdup on a long-term extension? It's where's the money. I think there's broad general agreement, Transportation Committee, bipartisan about what we want to do. Obviously, there's going to be some haggling over the details. But the issue is, where does the money come from? And that's not a transportation issue the way under the arcane House rules. Where that money comes from the Ways and Means Committee. And that's Paul Ryan. The two big funding sources on the table are, actually there's only one really big one on the table, and that's a repatriation tax for monies companies have cost of trapped abroad. Lower that tax and use the revenue from that lower tax for all the repatriation money on the highway bill. I have a proposal that I've laid out that would increase H-1B and STEM visas and entrepreneurial visas, which that's basically Darrell Ice's Skills Act from last year. It scores out at $108 billion. We could fix the easy immigration problems and pay for the highways there. Unfortunately, a lot of the pro-immigration activists say it's not comprehensive, we don't want anything. My proposal with this Walter of California fixes the H-1Bs, which is skilled workers, and STEM visas and entrepreneurial visas for the students that come over here on student visas. They get a PhD and there's a possible funding source there. But here are a couple of things, direct technology, that I think there is going to be a technology title in the next bill, I'm assured by Chairman Schuster. But I think at a bare minimum, we need to come up with some interoperability standards. It's criminal that my toll tag in Texas isn't compatible with Easy Pass. There were steps towards that in MAP 21. But we need a universal toll tag system, interoperability there. That's easy. I think we need data interchange standards so different systems can communicate. We need vehicle infrastructure. We need, again, outside our committee's jurisdiction, but we're going to need some bandwidth for that. We're going to need to come up with some standards. And I think the model is the internet. You kind of do an RFC and let the industry come. You can't, the government's not going to come up with anything that innovative. But we can require standards. The other standards, we need transit systems to be able to report back in some sort of system where you have an API to pull out transit time. So applications, I can sit on my smartphone and it'll tell me when the next bus will be along, when the next subway train will be along. Ideally, it should include taxis, Ubers, and everything else. We need some standards for transit data, and I think that's going to be valuable to even increasing use of transit if you have real-time information. And you're starting to see that up here in Washington. Subways is easy; they take when the next train comes, but you're starting to see it at bus benches now. And with the technology, this is old technology to do that. I mean, that's low-hanging fruit that ought to be easy to get. And standards for vehicle-to-vehicle communication, the auto industry and the tech industry need to come together. And again, I think some sort of RFC type procedure is the way to go with that. So those are kind of my broad, general topics. I'd be happy to play around or to stump the congressman.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Congressman? Yes, sir.
How about the gas tax?
So you're not going to see an increase in gas tax with the current makeup of Congress. Now, I think there are a couple of options there. I think in a long-term basis, rebranding it rather than a gasoline tax as a highway user fee might help. Actually, user fee polls lower than tax in favorability. But some sort of rebranding it as something other than a tax has an opportunity. The ultimate, we get the gasoline tax really is on a collision course with itself as a long-term funding method. As gas mileage goes up and you see alternative fuel vehicles. I mean, if you talk to really in the know folks, the ultimate solution is a vehicle miles driven tax, which again follows a user fee. You're calling it a tax. There's some political issues with that, but as a complete replacement, it might need to be done. But there are privacy concerns that folks have, and how do you create a system where it's pay as you go, so you don't get a $2,000 bill when you renew your license plate for your miles driven. So you set something up where there's an anonymous data reported back to the pump when you gas it up, or when you connect to the charging station, or when you fuel natural gas or whatever you fuel the vehicle. I think the public's concerned about it. I think the way to address it, we're all kind of geeky in here. Let's open source it and have a system where you know it's anonymous and it's a pay-as-you-go system. I think we can quell that fear. It's going to have to be pay-as-you-go. You're going to have enough public confidence in it that it's anonymous. I think you need some degree of sophistication in it, because I do think we may have an opportunity to include, rather than just a mile travel fee, you could potentially have a congestion surcharge based on location, and that's something that can be built into the system. But the public, you've got the experimental project going on in Oregon right now. We're going to see how that shakes out. But, it may just be, rather than trying to eke by with rather than, actually, not even eke by is right. Rather than fighting for an increase in the fuel tax, maybe the thing to do is start advocating now, and completely doing away with that, going to allow certain people. Most experts think that's the better way to go. It is a long-term solution. But again, there are a lot of politics involved in that. And the other piece of it is any change like that is going to require bipartisan support and leadership from the top. And, Ronald Reagan pushed the last change to that through. He worked it pretty hard.
That certainly was the recommendation, by the way, of the National Surface Transportation Finance Commission that I chaired a few years ago. Bipartisan group, Republicans and Democrats, and we agreed on. The thing we most strongly agreed on is exactly what you said. One other question.
Yes, ma'am.
So what kind of feedback are you getting from Chairman of the Railway Committee for the integration and transportation?
Really, from the transportation side of it, I think, actually Chairman Schuster's actually told me this. I'm not sure how on the record it was, but I'll tell you. He says he doesn't care where the money comes from as long as he gets it. And I don't think he'll object to me making that public. The Judiciary Committee, which I also sit on, agrees that there needs to be we need to do something about, especially entrepreneurial visas. And the Skills Act really isn't that many more people coming in. It's a reallocation from the visa lottery to more targeted visas that will have an economic impact and meet the economic needs of the country. Again, there's some who value deeply the diversity visa program. But I think we're letting our, especially with our entrepreneur visas, we're letting our best and brightest go start their businesses somewhere else and starving our high-tech companies of talent. Whether it's to fund the highways or just the right thing to do, I think the entrepreneurial visas need to be done. But there again, there's a broad coalition of companies and interest groups that want comprehensive immigration reform and are going to fight anything that breaks one piece of it off because it weakens their coalition. If we get the H-1B visas off the table, H-1B supporters are we're done. If we get the STEM visas, high-tech companies, okay, we got what we want, we're done, and the heat comes off for a broader program. That's one of the most frustrating things for me in Congress is even the things we all agree on, we can't always get done because it makes something else down the road harder to do. I get frustrated about it. I talk a lot at home. The conservative groups, Tea Party groups, say, why don't you get X, Y, and Z done? And I have to remind them that the founding fathers created a system that was actually difficult to get federal laws passed. They believed in a limited federal government, more stuff at the state, so they created three branches of government, two on the legislative. So you got House, Senate, and the President. And they've all got to come to some sort of compromise for something to become law. And that's never been easy. So the system's operating as designed to make it difficult for the federal government to have too much power. Even though we've crept to too much power. It's actually making it harder to give back some of that power. So listen, thank you all for having me. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your leadership.
I apologize for not being able to stay. I typically have about 20 things on my schedule on a day I'm in Washington. Thank you all for your hard work.
Thank you.
Thanks. Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Stephen.
tradition that allows us to rank Congress members on their time limits. This representative always does very well. We're always happy to have him at ITIF events. But the paper outside talks about the importance of intelligent transportation systems to the U.S. transportation network. As you know, information and communications and technologies have transformed virtually every part of America's society and economy, from education and healthcare and government. And now they're really in the early stages of transforming transportation. What ITS really does is enable every element of the transportation network, from vehicles to roadways to infrastructure such as traffic lights, to become intelligent by embedding them with sensors and empowering them to connect with each other through various wireless technologies. In essence, they're about bringing real-time, actionable intelligence and information to every actor in the transportation network, from drivers to state DOT transportation officials. As such, in importance, intelligent transportation systems represent the 21st century digital equivalent of the Interstate Highway System. And we should think about the next Surface Transportation Reauthorization Act as the first one of the digital age. Intelligent transportation systems come in a number of forms, and the report lays out this typology. For example, one class of ITS are represented by what's called advanced transportation management systems. These are things such as computerized adaptive traffic signal control lights and ramp meters. The Congressman alluded to various ITS-enabled transportation pricing systems, such as vehicle miles traveled systems, electronic road pricing or congestion pricing, electronic tolling, another form of ITS-enabled transportation pricing system. Perhaps the archetype for a national deployment of ITS is what's called vehicle to infrastructure and vehicle to vehicle communication, collectively V2X communication. The Department of Transportation's Connected Vehicle Research Program, formerly called IntelliDrive, envisions a network in which vehicles can communicate with each other and with infrastructure, for example, at intersections, so that collisions and accidents can be avoided. However, a number of advanced technologies are actually being deployed in the vehicle themselves. These are technologies such as blind spot detection, lane departure warnings, collision avoidance technologies. And these driver assistance technologies that are being deployed in the vehicle themselves have already demonstrated tremendous impacts on enhancing safety. In fact, recent studies of Toyota and Volvo vehicles have found that vehicles equipped with pre-collision warning indicators have decreased accidents by as much as 30%. And of course, full vehicle automation, the Google driverless car, is kind of the highest level, perhaps, of the application of ITS. ITS are vitally important because they deliver 5 key classes of benefits. And the first is increasing driver and pedestrian safety. In 2013, there were 5.5 million traffic accidents on American roadways. These accidents caused 2.3 million injuries, 33,000 fatalities, and an aggregate $1 trillion economic impact on the U.S. economy. Globally, there are 1.2 million fatalities on the world's roadways each year, causing 50 million accidents. So a number of ITS technologies can mitigate this. For example, DOT's Connected Vehicle Research Program estimates that vehicles that can communicate with each other can avoid 80% of traffic accidents. But ITS are critically important as well for improving the performance of the transportation network. Congestion cost the U.S. economy $168 billion last year. It's estimated that from 2021 to 2030, congestion will cost our economy $2.8 trillion. And a number of these technologies can significantly mitigate congestion. For example, cities that have deployed on a citywide basis these computerized adaptive traffic signal lights that lets you go at an intersection and goes through traffic around you, they've been shown to decrease congestion by 40%. Cities such as Stockholm and Singapore that have deployed congestion pricing solutions have cut congestion by 20%. Moreover, it's really about increasing the operational capacity of the existing road network. So currently, highways are about 68% occupied. a full range of ITS solutions could enable us to move 2 to 3 times as many cars over the same roadway. Just a couple more here. I want to point out they can also deliver critical environmental benefits. A recent study by ITS America found that the national deployment of ITS could save 650 million barrels of oil and 120 metric tons of CO2 emissions over a 10-year period. But I think the most important reason why the next surface transportation reauthorization bill should focus on ITS is because chips are fundamentally better than cement. Research shows that the benefit to cost ratio of ITS-enabled systems operations measures is 9 to 1, and that's almost 3 times as much as the addition of highway capacity, which has a benefit cost ratio of 2.7 to 1. In fact, the benefits of traffic signal optimization alone outweigh the cost by 3 to 1. In other words, the deployment of ITS systems and technologies rapidly and rarely pay for themselves. But as Rob pointed out in the beginning, while ITS is ready, the system is really not. We ran numbers in the report showing that from 1992 to 2012, while the U.S. Department of Transportation invested $962 billion in roads and transit, less than 1% of those funds went to ITS or information technology-enabled solutions. When you compare how we're investing in ITS compared to our global competitors, our research shows that Japan and Korea invest more than twice as much in ITS as a share of GDP than we do in the United States. So if these systems are so critically important, why is there so little ITS investment in the past? The main reason is that the dominant logic of transportation funding over time has really been about cement and concrete, not about ships, and it's time to change that mindset. Another challenge has been that state departments of transportation lack information technology skills. So a lot of the staff at state DOTs are civil or mechanical engineers, not electrical engineers. They don't understand as well the potential benefits of deploying these technologies. One of their challenges has been that ITS implementations aren't as always flashy or politically compelling as breaking ground on a new roadway. A GL report found that the lack of these groundbreaking ceremonies for a data center versus a new highway weren't as compelling for elected officials. So what should the policy principles be guiding the next reauthorization? And really, we think it's about a shift from concrete to chips. With every dollar at a premium in these tight budgetary times, policymakers should focus on investments that deliver the biggest bang for the buck for taxpayers, and that's found in intelligent transportation systems. It's also time to focus on ITS deployment and scaling existing solutions while ensuring nationwide systems interoperability. As the Congressman pointed out, there are a number of systems today, whether it's congestion pricing or EMP systems or smart traffic lights, that are proven, ready technologies that we can deploy today with full benefit to the society and the economy. So, in the report, we offer several specific recommendations for reauthorization. The first set of recommendations pertains to funding ITS deployment and incentivizing states. In particular, we call for a cement and chips funding approach that directs no less than 5%, or approximately $2.5 billion annually of the Highway Trust Fund to ITS-related projects. We would ask that states match that federal investment with at least a 40% in-kind match of their own, so that we should get to a point where across the United States, we're investing at least $4 billion annually in ITS-related projects. If you look around the world at the countries who lead in ITS deployment, particularly Korea and Japan, the way they got started was by using model city deployments. So Korea chose 4 cities, went in and put in ramp meters and the traffic lights and integrated corridor management and real-time information on all the buses. And so they did full ITS deployments at the city level. And this proved the power of these technologies to cut congestion and reduce accidents. Once other cities throughout Korea saw that, they clamored for those technologies. So we think we should follow a similar model here with a race to the Digital Top program, a competitive grant program that funds awards for 6 regions, essentially to submit blueprints to construct and implement a comprehensive smart infrastructure plan for their cities and communities. We think it's also time to tie a share of federal surface transportation funding to the state's documented improvements in transportation performance. So a share of the HTF should not be allocated on the number of miles of roadway a state has, but on states' documented performance improvements at cutting congestion, accidents, fatalities. And finally, we believe tolling should become a more important component of the transportation funding system. And so we would argue for lowering the share of federal funding to states for non-toll projects to 60%. Beyond funding, we need more institutional and strategic support for ITS. So we think it's time for Congress to charge the Department of Transportation with developing an innovation strategy and convening an interstate dialogue on ITS deployment with the states. And so this would really create a comprehensive plan about how information technology can be used to transform America's transportation system. But we also need more public-private partnerships between academia, industry, and government. We have a great model for this now with the National Network for Manufacturing or Innovation, or NNMI, that the Obama administration has put in place. We have so far 9 announced institutes of manufacturing innovation. And we think it's time for the Department of Transportation to lead a consortium focused on intelligent vehicle and infrastructures. We also should have a second one focused on innovative materials in transportation. There's so many cool new technologies out there today, like flexible concrete or embedded sensors that can go into bridges to measure their stresses. So we should have an innovative construction materials I&Y to focus on innovation. And finally, we need to do much more to leverage open data solutions for transportation innovation. While the DOT has recently announced it's put some of its data online at data.gov, we really need the states to get involved and to provide much greater availability of high-value, dynamic traffic data in machine-readable format that can create support the creation of more APIs for transportation innovation. And finally, there's so many great applications that have been developed at the city level. So if you're in Boston, they have this thing called Street Lock. And what it does is an application for your phone. As you're driving around throughout the city, if you go over a pothole, your phone records the location of the pothole and sends it to the city. And so the crew is ordered to come out and fix the pothole. In San Francisco, they have something called SF Park, where you get real-time real-time information on your phone about available parking spots throughout the city. So we have these cool applications bubbling up across the country, but every city could use those. There's no reason why they should not be scaled nationally. So a part of the HTF funds should go to scale these innovative solutions at the city level and make them broadly available across the country. So that's a brief overview of the report. Thank you very much. And let me turn it over to Hillary to declare.
Hi. I'm going to sit, and I hope that's okay. It seems very formal to stand. So thank you for having me today. I am going to touch on, I think, 3 issues that I think we should sort of keep in mind as we think about what a potential innovation cycle for the reauthorization bill might look like. And the first has to relate to investment in intelligent infrastructure. So we at Toyota believe that there is a tremendous benefit that is going to come from having vehicles with the ability to communicate with infrastructure, and then also infrastructure to communicate with vehicles. We think safety, crash avoidance benefits, we're thinking traffic and transportation system management benefits, environmental benefits, convenient benefits, a whole host of benefits. In order to have vehicle-to-infrastructure communication, right, you need vehicles capable of communicating, and surprise, surprise, you need infrastructure capable of communicating. And right now in the United States, we have a lack of the latter, right? We really don't have intelligent infrastructure. At Toyota, we're looking at this from a very sort of unique perspective, and that we, as you all know, are a Japanese headquartered company. And as Stephen pointed out, Japan is light years ahead of the United States in terms of its investment in intelligent infrastructure. And as a result, companies like Toyota were able to bring really remarkable vehicle-to-infrastructure communication technology to the market in Japan as far back as 2009. And we haven't been able to bring similar technology to the US market because our cars would have nothing to talk to. So we need to address that. I think we need to address that problem here in the United States. There's a couple of limitations, I think, that we need to address. One is we have no money, right? There's just no money. We can't fill potholes. You know, how are we going to build out intelligent infrastructure? And there's also, I think someone alluded to this earlier, I think a sort of a lack of appreciation at the state and local level for what intelligent infrastructure will mean for communities. So I am very supportive of what ITIF is proposing in this report, this idea of building out a number of model cities. We can leverage the limited resources we have, partner with local communities that are interested in trying this out. The benefit there will be that we will all see the benefits, other communities will see the benefits, and they hopefully will want to follow suit and put their money into this kind of thing going forward. The second thing I want to talk about is collaboration and cooperation. So I have a secret for you all. And the secret is that there is a tremendous amount of interest from a lot of companies in intelligent transportation. And we're not talking about just your traditional players, your traditional transportation companies, right? We're talking about traditional technology companies who have a lot of interest in this. And this is a highly competitive market, right? With lots of people who are hoping to come out on top, okay? So what does that mean? Anytime you have a highly competitive market, it's very hard to have a kumbaya moment where everyone comes together and agrees on what's one common path for, right? Because when you pick a common path, there are going to be winners and there are going to be losers, and no one wants to be on the losing side of this equation at this point in the game. However, what's happening now is you've got government replicating divisions that you're seeing within the intelligent transportation marketplace, right? So you've got agencies playing off of one another. You've got the federal government playing off of the state government. And the result is a fractured approach that ain't going to work, right? So someone needs to take leadership, and I think the federal government could maybe do this, which means creating some sort of cross-agency collaborative organization at the federal level, where agencies who are all working in this space are coming together, talking about these issues, but also that are interfacing with a cross-sectoral group of companies that are interested in this space. Transportation companies, technology companies, other stakeholders. And also, as I think ITIF has asked for in its report, working federal and state government. I think the benefit that can come from this is that those who are governing, or who we are asked to govern, can maybe help put together some sort of strategic plan that will at least appreciate or understand sort of the complexity of the marketplace, the divisions within the marketplace, and can balance those effectively with some sort of path forward. And then the last issue I want to talk about, which has already been touched on a couple of times already, is this issue of interoperability, and this is honestly what keeps me up at night, which is sad but true. When we're talking about vehicles communicating with other things, right, whatever these things are, each other, infrastructure, X, whatever X might be, if it's not infrastructure or vehicles, we have a unique challenge. Okay, vehicles are a little different, right? Vehicles are different because you keep them for a really long time, right? On average, 10 or 11 years. There's a lot of different manufacturers who are each selling lots of cars. You spend a lot of money on your car, right? It's the second most expensive thing you're probably ever going to buy in your life. So that's a factor. And also they're inherently mobile, right? And you drive them around from city to city, from state to state. So we've got a situation where if I sell you a car tomorrow that can talk to other cars, you're going to expect that it's going to talk to all of the other cars and not just a subset of the other cars. You're going to expect that it's going to work with the infrastructure in Springfield, Illinois, the same way it works with the infrastructure in Springfield, Virginia, right? Because you spent a lot of money on it. And you want it to work tomorrow, and you want it to work 10 years from now, right? That's a challenge, because when you're dealing with innovation, and you're having to balance it with the need to lock something in, which sounds very scary, so that we can have that sort of interoperability, it creates really significant challenges. And it's something that I think the government can help sort of foster a conversation about how we do this in a way that makes you not stuck with the Betamax version, you know, 2 years from now, the technology takes a different direction. So that's all. Those are my 3 observations I want to make.
Thank you, Lori. Mary.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Mary Brown from Cisco Systems. So we're a Fortune 100 company in San Jose, California, and for several years now we have been talking about the Internet of Everything until we're blue in the face. And the transportation sector is among those things that are the Internet of Everything, right? So there's a couple of sort of Cisco perspectives I want to share with you that I'm going to tease out of the report you just heard about. Just to kind of highlight where we think we're going from a big picture perspective. And so the question I'm going to ask is, what does it mean to connect vehicles and roadways and toll booths and traffic signals? What does that really mean? We heard a list of consumer benefits, right, in the presentation, and saw a list of those, and those are all very accurate, and those are all really good reasons why we would want to proceed forward into this new connected transportation sector. Driving is going to get safer, drivers are going to get more and timely and better information about what's going on around them. These are all wonderful things. I do not discount those at all. But there's 2 other things, I think, that come out of this question of what is the meaning of moving to this new connected environment. One is that we are going to be able to capture new insights into the use of the nation's roadways. We're going to have information at our fingertips that we never had before, and be able to make decisions on it, and be able to connect one piece of information with another piece of information in ways that have never been possible before. So when the congressman said, we don't want a lot of tops-down decision-making out of the federal government, I say, yay, because guess what? Those kinds of connections, those ways in which we analyze diverse data points are going to bubble up from the cities, from the state highway departments. We're not going to sit here in Washington and figure it all out. We've got to let this environment bubble up really great ideas about how all this connected data can be used. So examples, right? Not just how many cars are flowing over the bridge, which you can do with a counter, right, that you could lay across the road. But what's the relationship between vehicular volume and speed on wear and tear on the bridge, right? Those kinds of connections are going to be possible today in this new connected world. How can we dynamically change traffic signals in a city to ease congestion over the course of the day? That's going to be possible in this new connected world. What's the relationship of traffic volume to parking utilization? That's a question we can't really answer today, but that's going to be possible in the new world too. So we're going to get a lot of new insights as people in the state highway departments and the parking offices and people who concern themselves with transportation ask a bunch of questions that's going to allow us to make some smarter decision making in our city planning and in our road planning and in our maintenance and everything else. It's a tremendously important point and part of the value that connected transportation brings. The other piece of this, and this is not usually recognized in these kinds of conversations, is that as we connect this sector, as we connect the cars and the roadways and all the pieces of the surface transportation sector, we're going to unleash new value in the sector that isn't there today. This is not a zero-sum game. The pie gets bigger. So we are going to have new revenue sources, and we're going to have new cost-saving sources that we can't do today in our unconnected transportation sector, right? Now that new revenue and the cost savings are going to accrue to our friends of the states and our friends of the cities, and hopefully they'll use those wisely to invest more deeply into transportation, but ultimately it's going to be up to them. But to me, this is why I think public policymakers, whether they're local, state, or federal, should care deeply about trying to move this transition along. So for example, smart parking applications today can tell you how to find a space. That's cool, that's great. You don't have to sit in traffic, you can go right to the space. But what the charge for parking could be set dynamically. What if a city said, you know what, I'm trying to reinvest in this corridor in my city, and I'm trying to make that a new center of economic development in my city, and I'm putting in a farmer's market on a Saturday, and I want to actually decrease the pricing during the farmer's market to pull people in. Or a center city saying, I am just getting slammed with traffic at a certain hour of the day. I want to have surge pricing like Uber does to try to discourage people from coming in and trying to park on the street. These are all sources of new revenue that cities and states can be looking at. Cost savings. We could use our emergency response vehicles much more efficiently if we could figure out how to get them through intersections and on their way to the hospital or the fire or the police event, right? As opposed to them having to wind around traffic in the heart of the city, as I'm sure you all have seen every day, walking around or driving around Washington. And these things have huge value. Cisco estimated that smart parking alone globally has a $41 billion revenue at stake. Right? That's a huge amount of money that could be generated if we went to full smart parking. So no surprise. I mean, Cisco is all about trying to operationalize this sector of our economy with IP-based networking, trying to deliver on the promises that we see in the sector. I congratulate ITIF on giving us some very provocative and thoughtful ideas on how we might do that from a policy perspective, and I look forward to your questions.
Great, thank you. Jonathan.
Well, thanks to ITF for inviting me, and as a resident civil engineer, I have to say it's concrete, a balanced transportation system, concrete and asphalt. You haven't mentioned asphalt at all. You want to be a little bit careful that you don't get into trouble there. I think the report really does an excellent job of laying out what you call, Rob, an inflection point. I really think we are seeing some transformation in our transportation system. And I think it makes the point well that's already been made that it's not only about facilities, it's about services. And the fact that users and stakeholders in the transportation system are increasingly expecting a bundle of facilities and information put together and delivered 24/7 in a highly reliable way to handheld, mobile devices, desktop devices, to know that the system, what's the state of the system, what's the expected state of the system, is it safe or convenient to use it. I think the challenge, and maybe where I would go a little bit further than the report, is how well governments are prepared to deliver this very complicated bundle of services. And governments face huge challenges in trying to deliver this bundle. Procurement is a huge problem. We haven't talked at all about procurement. Hiring and retaining the right talent has been mentioned already. Annual funding cycles that don't fit with big, large dollar expenditures. Deferred maintenance and a tendency to defer maintenance because of the annual funding cycle. The rapid pace of technological change. The fact that today's technology may be fundamentally different than what was specified a year ago when you wrote a contract. And so the procurement cycle and the construction cycle are much slower than the technology cycle. And the state design and construction manuals are often things that have accumulated into stacks of documents this high over decades, and very difficult to depart or to justify departing from those in its conventional procurement, planning, program delivery mode. So the two additional elements I would encourage us to consider as we think about reauthorization, and the technology title is one, procurement reform, and second, public-private partnerships, which Steve has already mentioned in the context of R&D public-private partnerships, but also in terms of infrastructure service delivery. And I'll close with just one example. I was recently out in San Francisco. There's a highway that connects the Golden Gate Bridge to downtown San Francisco called the Presidio Parkway. It's being built. Part one got some stimulus money and was built through conventional procurement. Part two is being delivered as a public-private partnership. So a company has signed a multi-decade agreement, and they're delivering the highway, and they'll get availability payments for making the road available over the course of every year for 30 years. Well, even now, only in the second, they're not quite, in fact, I think they may be opening on the Friday after Memorial Day, so a week from this coming Friday, was the plan as of March, to open the new Phase 2 segment. But as they built that, the ITS components that were specified in the original design were obsolete. And because it was a public-private partnership, the concessionaire was able to just change that out and use the latest, most up-to-date technology and put it into the roadway. Whereas if Caltrans, the California Department of Transportation, had been delivering this, they say themselves, they would have had to stick with the outdated technology or else pay for a change order to put it into place. So I think focusing on this issue of giving asset owners, the states and localities, the tools that they need to open up their procurement processes, to be able to deviate from the design and construction guidelines, tremendously important and very, very difficult to accomplish. So I think we really need to focus on this delivery dimension. And I would submit, I'm from the Center for Transportation and Public-Private Partnership Policy, so I would say, submit that public-private partnerships offer a mechanism for delivering more efficiently and more effectively. And I think we need to think deeply about how that relates to ITS and the delivery of the best that technology can have to offer today, as well as tomorrow, the next day, next month, next year, because the rate of change, I think, is increasing. So I'll stop there and turn it back over to you.
So we've got plenty of time for questions. We'll adjourn precisely 1:30. Let me just make a quick point here about, because the Congressman alluded to this a little bit. So hopefully you've now all been convinced already that, that ITS is really going to be an important technology to improve transportation. The real question is, why should Congress be involved in this? I mean, the city project you talked about, smart parking, that the states are doing. And I think there's 4 really compelling reasons for why there's a federal role needed now. I don't think there's a federal role needed really in perpetuity, but I think now there is. And it goes, I think, really to the key point that John said, is we're at an inflection point. And there are systemic barriers keeping that inflection point going from sort of one level of equilibrium, which is sort of the concrete / asphalt equilibrium, to the chip. I don't know what you need an A word for technology, analog chip technology. One is just risk and uncertainty. This is risky. This is uncertain. You don't know what's going to happen if you're an elected official. You're trying something brand new. To Jonathan's point, it's not in the manual. The federal government has a key role sort of getting states and cities to be a little bit more risk-taking. Second are a set of system interdependencies. Mayor Hillary talked about this notion of that one of the reasons Toyota is a leader in this space is that Toyota and other car companies in Japan, I'm sure, and the Japanese government all did this together. And so you were able to have these things in the Toyota car that aren't maybe here because you had these other things that were outside of the car that only the government could. So you have these system interdependencies. If the government's not acting, we're not going to have the private sector be able to act. Which, by the way, has important competitiveness implications. If we don't have that environment here, foreign car companies, where they have that in their home environment, are going to gain advantage. I know we all want Toyota to win, but
10 manufacturing plants in the U.S.
I'm absolutely. My only point is that this has a competitive impact. The third one is really about coordination challenges. Hillary again mentioned that we drive across state borders, and we have to have systems that all interoperate. The federal government really only one that can do that. Look at the Easy Pass fiasco where we left that up to the states government decades ago. That was. And lastly, Jonathan's point about just institutional capabilities or rigidities. We're not a criticism of state DOTs or even MPOs, but we're not talking about the most technologically savvy organizations. Now, in theory, they could be and should be, but I think through the federal government incenting them to be that, more PPPs, working with a wide variety of companies, we can get there. But I think if we just don't do anything, if we keep doing concrete and asphalt, 10 years from now, we're going to look at the gap between best practice in our lives and best practice in the transportation transportation space is going to be even more yawning than it is today. So with that, why don't we just open up for any comments or questions? Do you want to just identify yourself, please? Yes, sir.
Yeah, so Sean Kimball with Congressman Lipinski's office, and I heard a couple of different mentions of a need for a strategic plan for coordination. DOT actually is in charge of putting out a RD&T, Research Development Technology, strategic report every 5 years. Last one was for 2013, 2015, compared to 2018, so there'll be another one coming up soon. What are some of the things that you guys think would be important to see in those reports that wasn't in the last one? You know, increased coordination and you know, involvement of the private sector. What does that look like in a strategic report that the DOT puts out?
Well, you know, I think that's in the strategic plan, 2015 to 2019 that the DOT has is good, and it does. One of the most fundamental things we're calling for is more from a shift, mostly on research towards deployment of all these technologies. And, you know, the ICT strategic plan does talk about the three pillars of research, deployment, and adoption. But we think there should be so much more focus on the latter specifically. And there just hasn't been a strong enough level of coordination between DOT and the states and state DOTs about how these technologies can really be deployed today at the community and city level, so that we can, you know, realize in real time, in this case, technology for the traveling public. The stage, for example, look at the potential impact of making computerized practice and rights available in cities and show the impact in what's gone on. So that would be one component of it. Also, I think there's a lot more work to be done on measurements and being able to do comparative assessments across cities and communities and states about how these technologies are being deployed to document the improvements they're having and reducing efficiency and quality. So there's starting points, but there's just not enough information in the federal government.
Yes, so this may shock you that I say this, but I also don't think this necessarily needs to be a DOT-only exercise. My sense is that some of these new players in this ITS ecosystem, DOT is like not an agency that they deal with regularly. And I think they view DOT as being very sort of traditional transportation centric, which is why I think there's a lot of value to having this be an exercise that's taken on with DOT certainly in the lead. Or in a leadership role, but we really need to get to the point where the federal government is looking at this holistically and it produces sort of a cooperative environment where all of these players feel comfortable, you know, having a seat at the table and sharing their perspectives. So I think limiting it to DOT is problematic.
So I just want to add one perspective as we think about strategically, how do we get from where we are to where we're going to go? I mean, one of the things we have found in our research, and this has been consistently true over a long period of time, is for state and local elected officials, the number one care about they have is transportation. And if you think about it, that's because if they go and try to recruit Toyota to come to their city or come to their county, one of the first questions any prospective business is going to have is, what's your transportation infrastructure, right? It's the number one care about year after year. So the elected officials at some point get it, right? We found, you know, in the work we're doing with public-private partnerships in East St. Louis, the elected officials get it. They are not the people who talk to DOT all day, right? So I think part of the strategy is get to those people because they're the economic development people. They understand why this is important. I'm not sure the state highway departments, they want to be, they may not be as forward-leaning until there's political consensus within their jurisdiction about which way they should be leaning.
I like that point because I think it's often about changing the economics of how transportation is thought about at the city community level. There was a study done by the Recent Foundation which said that for 8 U.S. cities, large ones like Dallas, Atlanta, San Francisco, Detroit, if they could establish free flow traffic conditions in their communities, that they would produce economic growth by $135 billion, increase the tax base by $9 billion. So deploying these technologies to deal with these problems at a local level changes the calculus of the economics city level. And that's not often not seen in these types of great solutions.
So somebody in the back.
Yes, hi, my name is Sarah Blackwood, and I'm at a government relations and communications firm called Banner Public Affairs. And first of all, thank you, ITIF, for your thought leadership, and it's great to see that there's private sector buy-in, which is, as we all know, really important in order to move the ball forward. Putting on my staffer hat, I think the recommendations are great, but something I didn't see in there is coordination with FCC and talking about spectrum allocation, and I bring that up because in light of what happened with the Amtrak, in light of the Amtrak accident and the focus on PTC.
Oh, your question's on positive train control?
No, it's about the spectrum issues and the availability, and so I'm curious as to whether or not that's an issue that you all have looked at, and if you'd be willing to consider that in your recommendations as a coordination effort, looking at, you know, they could say, hey, all this is great, but there's not spectrum available to do what you want to do. Thank you.
Well, I'll start. So first of all, to be clear, there's an incredible diversity of views on the DSRC issue that you all know. That's point number one. Point number two is...
Fairly stated.
Point number two, I mean, the difference is should you dedicate this particular band to this particular use, and if so, could you use sharing for other kinds of uses, like the ability to use this with unlicensed? To our view, that's largely a technical question. I don't know the answer to that. It's our position is that's largely a technical question. There's a whole other sort of argument, which other people here are more familiar with than I think we are. Maybe it's even better to switch out bands completely and do something different. We haven't looked at that and don't have a position on it. I do think it's going to be, I do think there's two sort of principles we should go by on this case. One is we should use the amount of spectrum needed for this use and no more. And secondly, you need to have spectrum that's going to do the job and not have any interference, because it's critical to be able to have the latency that you need to be able to do this. But beyond that, that gets you a lot of different places as we hear. So Mary or Hillary?
Yeah, so let me broaden out the radio spectrum discussion on transportation. So the answer is, do you need radio spectrum? Yes, you do. Boy, and you need all different kinds of it. So the positive train control stuff is different purpose-built spectrum for the railroads. Right now, I don't have a view on whether there's some people in town arguing they don't need their own spectrum, they can share with others. I don't have a view on that, but I do know that system is purpose-built for what it's doing. DSRC at the 5.9 is purpose-built for vehicle-to-vehicle and vehicle-to-infrastructure. Our nation's service providers, or cellular service providers, are going to be a very important player in the transportation space, providing you with data and information into the cab of that vehicle, right? Their spectrum is going to be utilized. There's going to be other kinds of spectrum technologies that are going to be brought to bear with the Internet of Transportation, right, that we haven't even thought about yet. Hopefully this stuff is going to be on a standards basis and will be designed to work with IP-based technologies, which is the lingua franca of how technology runs today. And time is going to tell exactly when we're going to need different kinds of allocations for different purposes. But the short answer is yes, radio spectrum is an issue, and it will be a diverse number of bands that are put to work here.
Okay.
I'm Dick Munch from Compass Transportation Technology. There's a lot of things I like in what I've heard, but I don't want to waste your time with praise.
You can send me an email later.
If you look at history, if you look at what the congressman said if you have a new technology idea, you don't come to Congress looking for support. And I think that when you look at technology, it changes much faster, at a faster pace than the public sector does. You look at US DOT has been working on V2V, V2I for 25 years, and they're only now beginning to make progress. If you look at the history of transportation in the U.S., public sector has focused on infrastructure, on the right-of-way. When I look at the types of ITS you laid out, A lot of it, ATIS, ATMS, all the traditional ITS is part of that. You need to put that into construction. The stuff that's new, and I have a hard time thinking of it, using the word ITS for it, is connected vehicle, autonomous vehicle. That stuff truly represents a sea change. That's primarily driven by the public sector. You look at, from Google, I don't think they've ever taken the public dollar. And
Driven by the private sector.
Yeah, private sector. So the question is, if most of that new technology, the new ITS, if you will, is being driven by the private sector, it seems to me you're still looking at the traditional model. You focus on US DOT and that being primary role, maybe public-private partnerships. I think both of those things will slow things down. Are there things that federal government should be doing to encourage and speed up autonomous vehicles, self-driving cars? Again, and part of it I'm advised that when I talk to some of these people, they say, we don't need V2V. The technology's past the SRC, we're fine with other ways of doing it. So they have a very different model. And I worry a little bit that what you've got is sort of bought into the US DOT model.
Well, it's not just DOT's model, I'll tell you that. I can tell you definitively that from Toyota's perspective, we will never get to a fully autonomous vehicle without communication being a key component.
Absolutely. I agree.
And I'll give you, I'd rather than saying that, I'd like to give an example. I'm going to give you an example that may sort of explain to you why we see it as so fundamental. It's a real basic example. Back in August, I was driving around in one of Toyota's autonomous vehicles. Okay, we get up to a place, we're on a skinny road, narrow road. There is a truck, sort of a budget running truck, size truck, that is pulled over on the side of the road with some folks unloading some cargo to the back of it. Because it's a narrow road, the truck's trying to be over, but it's jutting out quite significantly into the traffic lane. The autonomous vehicle pulls up behind the truck, and it stops, because it senses that there is a truck in the roadway, and it assumes, I guess, that it's a stop sign or a stoplight, or there's some congestion ahead. And it stops, and it waits. And it waits. And it waits. We would have been waiting there for hours till these guys had finished unloading. And it hit me at that moment how fundamental vehicle-to-vehicle communication is, because the only way our autonomous car would have known it needed to go around that truck is if the truck had told my car it was parked or the engine was off. And that is so fundamental to how we navigate around. You don't even think about that kind of thing, but it occurred to me at that instant, I hear from our engineers how critical this is, and I've had some sort of appreciation. But to witness it sort of firsthand, I went, oh my gosh, this is it. Because in that case, we had to take the vehicle out of autonomous mode, drive it around the truck, put it back in autonomous mode, and go about our business. So yes, this gets to my point, though, about how there are different models, there are different perspectives on how to get from here to there. And it is going to be a challenge for the federal government to understand, appreciate, absorb, and respect those differences and come to some sort of a plan that attempts to balance them, or in some cases is going to pick a winner, pick a loser.
I may also suggest that there's not as much of a gap there as what you're proposing. I mean, if you go back to where a lot of the seed corn for this autonomous vehicle technology came from, it was the DARPA challenge that put forward this challenge to drive a vehicle across the Mojave Desert. But that was what it was a different model. It was a challenge model, a prize model. And I think what we're suggesting today is much more of a partnership model that moves the government role from a distant regulator that assesses the technologies that show up in the doorstep and regulates them, but it says, now can we understand that these are very powerful technologies to transform the transportation system in the country, and put in place these models like these collaborative research consortium, whether it's built on an a national network for manufacturing innovation model, or a DARPA model, or an autonomous vehicle research initiative, but to put the government and the private sector side by side in developing and testing these advanced vehicle communication innovation technologies.
I guess I want to go back to something Rob said earlier about the Easy Pass disaster, or whatever you call it. So you mentioned that I had done early work on Easy Pass, and I guess I hear those as fighting words in a way. To say Easy Pass has been a disaster. I mean, here's a technology that's been operating for 25 years. It has I think, on the order of 80 million tags out there, providing benefits, for 25 years, avoiding congestion avoidance, all the things that we want. And so to come back today in 2015 and say it's a disaster, I think is a mistake. Can it be improved? Absolutely. Would we like interoperability? Would it be good for cars in the east to be able to use the tollways in the west for Congressman Micah's Sun Pass to work up in the northeast as well? Absolutely. But to say it's been a disaster, and I sat on the ITS America or IHS America Standards Committee, way back in 1991, trying to get a user requirements document put together. And we went for almost a decade trying to define user requirements for that electronic payment standard. So EasyPass is certainly not perfect, and DSRC, if it were fully deployed, would be able to deliver a lot more bang for the buck. But I wouldn't want to give away the benefits of the last 25 years for doing that. So I guess it comes to the question of what do we mean by success? And this goes to your question, what should USDOT be thinking of, and what is success? So having comprehensive interoperability is wonderful, but it's expensive. We are, as you mentioned, in an extremely rivalrous, competitive environment, and Cisco's product may not work well with other hardware manufacturers' model, and how well those things work. And the public, I think, benefits from the rivalry. And so coming in with a heavy-handed federal approach that says, okay, we're going to do standards, and we're going to have a uniform standard, it's not necessarily bad, but I think it's a very delicate issue. On V2D, on V2I, on DSRC, on low latency vehicle-to-vehicle communication, extremely important to have that. But it's not the only model. If it's life safety, then I really want that low latency, as I call it in the paper this morning. You don't want to be slowed down by somebody downloading a movie in the next car from knowing that the car in front of you has hit the brakes. You really need that instant service. So I think we have to be very thoughtful about the interoperability question and recognize that we don't want to freeze our technology in a 1991 or 2001 or 2011 timeframe.
So maybe I should use the word tragedy.
How about success? I think
to be clear,
yeah,
Jonathan, my
success.
point was not that EasyPass hasn't had incredible benefits. My only point is we should have one. That's all. And we didn't. And here's why this is a real issue. And it goes back to your question about what should DOT do. Well, I think one of the things DOT should do is do not allow states to have separate BMT systems, which is with the path we are going to go down. Oregon will have its own BMT system. It won't be the right system. It won't allow, my prediction, it won't allow congestion pricing and all the benefits you get beyond sort of this, what I would call stupid BMT, which is the odometer reading, versus smart BMT. And we cannot have 50 different BMT systems in this country. We need one. I see another point on standard. Everything that Mary's company makes uses Internet Protocol.
Right?
Thank you. Internet Protocol is the standard. Internet Protocol should be the standard on everything we do. Now, you can have arguments about, this is Internet Protocol. Sure. Only it's an iOS and an Android. But the underlying core system has got to be Internet Protocol. Last thing I understand that this old ITIS versus new ITIS, the new ITIS being basically all of the vehicles. I think there's two problems with that view. One is we haven't even done old ITS. So I'd like to do old ITS. I'd like to do that. We haven't even done that.
I'm in favor of that too.
Okay. And secondly, a lot of new ITS, AVs, need the I in the V to I. And so, and the only way you could avoid that, I wrote a piece recently arguing for the Milken Institute where I estimated $1.1 trillion in annual benefits if we had full AV adoption. So, I'm talking full AV, really smart. $1.1 trillion. By the way, if the federal government had to spend $5 billion to make that happen, that'd be like any idiot who spend $5 billion to get $1 trillion a year. Not saying that that's what you should do, but I'm just pointing out. But that system, you're still going to have traffic lights. You're still going to have pricing. You're still going to have all of these things. So if those systems don't incorporate that, and then you don't have the receiving end of that, smart traffic lights, the ability of cities and states to have toll systems or real-time pricing systems, you're not going to get the benefits of that.
One article I did read would say that AVs are going to be so smart they'll illuminate all traffic lights. That's fascinating. No more traffic lights, no more anything. The cars just know, and they'll be zipping through, you know, the thing at 60 miles an hour because they'll know they're the one, and the other guy misses your bumper by half an inch because he's going 60, and they just love. I don't think we're going to be there for a while. So I think we're going to need intelligent traffic lights. But my only point is, I just don't see this as a. There are some people, particularly on the right, who argue we can just let the private sector do this with AVs, and there's no public sector role for the infrastructure. Yeah,
I'm not sure what I'm saying.
some utopia maybe, but not anytime soon. Any other questions, comments? Sure. Go ahead.
So you mentioned $1 trillion benefit.
1.1.
Okay, well, 1.1 trillion. So that's broken down to a lot of people capturing that benefit. So what do you think are some of the low-hanging fruits in terms of near-term, maybe public-private partnerships, or where's some of that value get realized in the near term?
I'll tell you one thing, by the way. In the future, if you have a kid, the main thing you want to tell them is don't go into auto body repair. Because that's going to be the horse and bugger. That auto insurance is another industry. Don't go into that. You know, the idea that you're going to have crash. You know, we're a long way from that. Hillary, you want to?
Yeah, I don't know. I've been thinking a lot more about this. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, that there's a tremendous amount of value in terms of public-private research cooperation on the technology itself. Okay? I think that there's a lot of efforts to do this, and they seem to fall into disarray pretty quickly on sort of the research side of it. Everyone's working on the technology, and it's a race to the finish at this point, right? So there's not a lot of appetite, I don't think, for a lot of sort of coordination or need for the government to get involved on the development of the technology itself. That being said, you know, the one sort of elephant in the room on all of this is there's this agency called NHTSA, right? That at some point is probably going to want to regulate in the AV space. And there's a lot of research that they've identified that they think they need to do before they would be in a position to regulate effectively or intelligently in this space. They need to do that research like yesterday, as far as I'm concerned, because the technology's coming, and we're not going to have the luxury of time to sit around and twiddle our thumbs while NHTSA figures out sort of how it wants to handle this. The good news is I do think there's a fear that the technology cannot go forward until NHTSA regulates. And one thing I can sort of, for those who don't know NHTSA so well, how they regulate in the safety space, they generally don't regulate before technology hits the market. Smart, right? I mean, they wait until a few early adopters, which isn't the right terminology, but early sort of producers of the technology put something out on the market, like try to sell it to somebody rather than test it. And then they see how it evolves over a period of time, and then they come in and sort of regulate and sort of figure out what the rules of the road are going forward. As we sit here today, nobody has sold a fully autonomous vehicle in the U.S. market. Everyone is still in a testing phase. No one has actually brought a technology to the market. So NHTSA's not ready to act, thankfully, right? And they're going to wait until a few companies actually sell this stuff, and there's Jane and John Doe cruising around the streets in one of these things, and then they'll start to figure out sort of where to go from there. But that research still needs to happen before they're ever going to be in a place to figure out how to regulate it. So that's a place that perhaps there's some. It's not really technology research. It's more, human-machine interface, human factor, performance requirement type stuff. That's what makes sense.
I mean, I would add the low-hanging fruit is procurement. I know it sounds extremely boring, but improved procurement doesn't take a lot of federal dollars to make it happen. But either protecting or facilitating the agency owners, it can be through public-private partnerships, or it can just be through other approaches of traditional delivery. But trying to help states develop new models of procurement that are more amenable to rapidly changing technology is, I think, a huge barrier, because as we have smarter and smarter infrastructure, it's increasingly important that the states be able to secure it. And it's, there's a great fear, I think, on the part of many public agency staff that they're going to get a Betamax and be stuck, and maybe Betamax, or EasyPass, as Rob would say. So, but it may have to be thrown out before the payment wears out, and you may have to go back and replace it, and that's not bad. It generates benefits while it's there. Technology moves on, and you procure something new, because the life cycle, as you said about your phone, you're not getting rid of it because it doesn't work anymore. You're getting rid of it because there's something better there. But there's a mindset, I think, in many asset owner agencies, where the lifetime of concrete or asphalt or a combination of both is sort of what the norm should be for the life cycle of anything that the public is procuring. And that, I think, is a real barrier to bringing into our transportation system the types of ITS technologies that this report talks about.
I think even dissemination and sharing of best practices across communities would deliver enormous benefits. Tucson made all their traffic lights computerized and adapted to the traffic conditions of the intersection, and they realized a report could be a 40% decrease in congestion citywide. That's a great finding, real powerful. That should persuade every other city right away to do that. Especially the District of Columbia.
Yes.
There's a $1,400 per citizen congestion penalty you pay every year. So the government doesn't get the money.
I'll just say one last thing before we close. One of the things that's interesting, and Mary knows more about this than I do, but if you look at networks, which is sort of one of maybe their core business, we're moving to what's called software-defined networks, where a lot of the innovation in the net isn't going to just be in the hardware, but the software itself. And you would imagine, I mean, this is somewhat software-defined. I download my new iOS every couple of months, and I think we're not going to have everything baked into the hardware and vehicles, and even frankly in traffic lights and other things like that. I mean, I would imagine we're going to move to a world where a lot of it's going to be software-defined, and so the ability to continually upgrade. I mean, like traffic lights will be downloading the latest iOS, the latest operating system version for traffic light 8.7. So it suggests that we aren't going to as too locked in, I think, as some people think. I don't know if anybody agrees or disagrees.
Agree. Absolutely.
All right, well, great. We promised you'd be out here by 1:30 and we're 25 seconds late, so thank you all for coming, and please join me in thanking a great